Hello, this is Aaron, and I've got a quick Ableton walkthrough for you this evening. At least it's evening for me. Don't know where it is for you, but this video is stemming from some recent online discussions about whether or not to use Ableton Link or ReWire when using Reason. Link is new enough. I haven't had a lot of chance to look into it yet, but I do know that it is just tempo sync and grid sent to other applications that support Link, whereas ReWire is both MIDI and audio back and forth. So from what I've looked into, it looks like Link will be great for keeping metronomes synchronized with multiple machines. But if you're using one machine to run Ableton and Reason, I think ReWire is probably going to be the best way to go, simply because of all the control that you have by using Ableton as a ReWire host. So to jump in really quickly here, we're going to start with Ableton already open, and keep in mind that to use it as a ReWire host, it has to be open first with Reason closed. So I've got Ableton open here, and right now I've just deleted out everything that I can so we can start from scratch and work on setting up a framework on how to get it to work well with ReWire using the method that I prefer to use, which is using clips, envelopes, and instrument racks to control all of my MIDI data. So a couple quick things. We've got Ableton open here, so now I'm going to open Reason. And once there is another ReWire host open, when you open Reason, it will open as a ReWire slave. So I am in here, and you can scroll up and look at the top of your rack just to confirm that it says ReWire slave mode, indicating that Reason is running as a slave. We've got a couple things to change here in Reason just to make sure we don't have any conflicting MIDI. So we'll first go to Reason and Preferences and to the sync settings. You're going to want to disable any MIDI input that you have here, because all MIDI input will be coming from ReWire, not going directly into Reason. I guess the same would go for control surfaces. If you use a control surface, I don't have one hooked up right now, but if you did, you would probably want to disable that so you can send controls through Ableton. And I'll touch on a couple things that let you send other control messages through ReWire. So now that we've got MIDI turned off, I am going to open up a little template that I have, which is essentially an empty rack. And I'll show you how I have it set up here really quickly. So in this empty rack, I'll just flip over to the back just so you can see that it is completely empty. I have three little mixers here, and this is the micro mix device. And the reason I have this set up is because I subgroup everything in Ableton when I send my performance set out to my sound engineer. And I'm usually sending 3 to 6 discrete outputs. So I've got 3 to 6 subgroups that I group all of my instruments and tracks into before sending it to the mixing desk. So because of that, I like to organize my Reason sounds in a similar way, just to minimize the number of audio channels I have going back and forth. So for this example, I'm just going to use my 3 main mixes: keys, pads, and aux. And if this were my real Ableton set, I would have 3 different subgroups set up in here. But for now, for the purpose of this demonstration, that doesn't really matter. But jumping back to Reason here, I've got 3 mixed devices set up and named just for keys, pad, and aux, just so you can get an idea of how to subgroup within Reason as well. I've got the outputs running up to the audio output section in Reason here. My first little mixer is running to outputs 1 and 2. My second mixer is routed to 3 and 4. Third mixer is routed to 5 and 6. And we'll see, again, how this plays out just a little bit later. So, yeah, I'll be honest, I've done a little production in Reason, but I mostly use it as a glorified sound bank. So let's load up a couple sounds here. Let's just load up a Reason piano here. And I really don't care which one it is. All right, so while that's loading, I'm going to flip around to the back, and take a look here. I've got this combinator, and it looks like it routed to the aux mix, so I'm going to move that up to my keys mix. That looks good. All right, now I'm also going to give this a name that I can remember and identify later. I'm just going to call this Yamaha C7. And now let's flip back to Ableton and let's get some MIDI sent over to it. So I'm going to create a few MIDI tracks, and this will be our MIDI control. MIDI, I'm just going to rename this MIDI in. I'm going to have this bring in MIDI from any controller that I'm using. Turn monitor on so that MIDI is constantly flowing in. Just remove that audio for now. All right, and then I am going to bring in an instrument rack and drop it on the channel. Expand it out so I can see the chain. And then I'm going to drop an external instrument into the rack. Now let's rename this, and we'll just call this Yamaha C7. I'm also going to scoot it over to chain position 1 so that position 0 is off. If I move the chain selector over to slot 1, there it is. Now let's look at our external instrument properties here. We're going to send the MIDI out to Reason. So under the MIDI drop-down, when you have Reason running as a ReWire slave, Reason will show up in your MIDI destinations. So we can select that destination, and your second drop-down now enables. And this shows you all the Reason destinations within whatever you have loaded up in Reason. So I remember I said to name the patch something recognizable. Here it is, that Yamaha C7 that I typed in all caps. You can see there's a lot of other MIDI destinations, so the more patches that you have loaded up in Reason, the more selections you'll have here to sort through. So it's a good idea to name your Reason instrument something unique so that you can find it easily. So again, selecting that is going to send all MIDI through this external instrument in the rack to Reason. And quick side note, there is the opportunity to pull audio back from Reason directly here in this external instrument. But I prefer not to do that, and I'll expound on that here as we go. But for now, I'm going to leave this set to no input because I only want this external instrument instance to be used to send MIDI going out. So if I were to play notes on my keyboard, you can't really see it or hear it, but if I jump over here to Reason, I can see that that piano instrument is playing. So now let's jump back to Ableton. And I know this is going to be loud when it comes in, so I'm going to start with it down quite a bit. Let's create a new audio track. And in the audio track, the audio source, we're going to select Reason as well. And this is grabbing the audio that's coming through ReWire. And if we look at the list of available audio outputs from Reason here, we'll see we've got our outputs 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and 5 and 6, and on down all the way to 64 channels of audio. So jumping back to look at Reason, those audio numbers correspond with the audio outputs here in your master section. So again, I had these 3 submixers set up, routing to 1 and 2, 3, 4, and 5 and 6. So that's what we're referencing here. So I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this a couple times, and we'll change this, and we'll create 3 audio channels total, 1 for 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and 5 and 6. And again, the reason we're doing this is so that I can send each of the Reason subgroups to my Ableton subgroups and kind of keep things consistent all the way through. So now that we've got these audio channels set up to receive audio from ReWire, we need to enable the monitor setting so that it is passing audio without requiring the tracks to be armed. So now if I were to play, let's bring that up just a little bit, you can hear what's going on there. We've got MIDI coming from the MIDI channel, going through the instrument rack to the external instrument, out through ReWire to Reason, and then we've got audio outputs 1 and 2 coming back into Ableton on this track right here. So in a nutshell, that is the extent of the framework. Once that's set up, you can expand on it and add instruments left and right. So let's bring in something else here. Strings would be good. All right, so bringing strings in here. This happened to bring in a mix channel on it, but that's okay. So we'll just take a look here and grab the mix output. Either the combinator output or the mix output, it doesn't really matter. Sometimes I have kept those mix channels in, other times it's not really necessary, but just make sure that whether or not your combinator patches are being routed through a Reason mix channel, whatever it is, just make sure the final output goes up to one of your mixers. So just for the example here, I'm going to bring the strings patch up to the pads output so that it comes out through outputs 3 and 4. Alright, so now that patch is loaded. Let's jump back to Ableton, and I am going to add another external instrument here. And let's scoot that over to position 2 in the chain. And then we'll select this one, send its MIDI destination to Reason, and let's go back and rename this Strings, all caps. Now we can find strings in the list of MIDI destinations. Again, no audio from this part of the plugin, because we already have the audio routing set up for anything in Reason that goes through outputs 3 and 4 through my second mixer. It's already coming in to Ableton here. So now on the MIDI control channel, position 0 is off, position 1 is playing the piano that's coming through mix 1, and I've got strings coming through the second output here. So on this MIDI control channel, I can then use a clip. If I create a couple different scenes here, I can use this clip to control the chain selector position. So let me create a quick clip here. This first clip we'll call off because it's position 0. The second clip, let's bring it to chain position 1. And we'll call this piano. And this other clip we'll leave on position 2, and we'll call this strings. Alright, and just a little maintenance here. I'm going to turn off loop on that. I'm also going to set the quantization to none so they launch right away. Alright, so playing this clip turns that chain selector off. As soon as I play this clip, piano comes on. As soon as I play this clip, strings come on. So that's how I can switch between Reason sounds really quickly. And if you need different instruments playing at a time, like to layer them, you can just duplicate your MIDI control channels. And ideally, I would have this set up so that I have a whole bunch of different piano clips in this channel, and I'd have a whole bunch of different pad or string clips in this channel. But for this example, we can use this MIDI channel to turn on the piano and this one to turn on strings. And so we've got both piano and strings playing because we duplicated that rack, and so we're sending MIDI to each of the instruments, bringing it back in through each of their respective subgroups. So then from here, I would take these Reason inputs, as I would call them, and send them either to my subgroups before going out to the mixer, or if you're just sending one stereo pair, you could just send it directly to your master. But the other thing with ReWire that I want to point out here is that the transport and tempo and everything stays perfectly in sync. So if I scoot this up so you can see the Reason transport bar here, if I click play in Ableton, you can see that Reason keeps up right along with it. Same thing if I adjust the tempo and drag it down, it stays perfectly in sync. Changing the Meter as well, stays perfectly in sync. Start, stop, it's all right there. So if you have any effects in Reason, like delays that are tempo synced, it will stay perfectly in sync with what you've got going on in Ableton. So that's it in a nutshell. There's one other thing that I do want to show you, and I know I've covered this in another video, but this is kind of the lead up to that video, and it's how to send other MIDI CCs over to ReWire. I did a little bit of looking when I was looking for this in the first place. There is no MIDI destination in the envelope to send other MIDI control to Reason. And the reason you might want to do that is because if you're using a combinator patch, these 4 knobs and these 4 buttons correspond to MIDI CC numbers. The knobs start at MIDI CC 71, 2, 3, and 4, and the buttons are MIDI CC 75, 76, 77, and 78. So you might have a patch where you've got a filter or an effect level or something mapped to one of these controls. So to send that information over to Reason, there is a Max for Live device called External MIDI Control, and I'll put a link to it in the video description. But let's bring up this rack and this Yamaha C7, and if I drag this External MIDI Control in front of the external instrument, it's going to be able to generate CC numbers that get sent on to whatever MIDI destination is down the line. So it's customizable here. This control 1, let's set that to MIDI CC 71 because that's going to correspond with that first knob we've got in the combinator, which on this patch it's the release resonance. So now if you've got MIDI controls mapped in Ableton, you can map something to this control, or you could even use an envelope. As you can see, you've got that device available and that control available on an envelope to control as well. But let's go back here. I'm going to scoot my windows around so you can see it. How should we do this? Let's bring it this way. All right, so this knob we have setting to CC71. As soon as I turn that, you can see it moving the first combinator knob there as well. If I change that to 72, oops, there we go. You can see it moving the second knob. So, a quick way to set this up would just be to plug in all these CC numbers right away, and you'll be good to go. So 71 through 74, and you've got full control of each of those knobs. And then again, 75, you've got button on, off. So pretty much it comes down to you can design any sounds you want in Reason, package it up in a combinator, map whatever Reason parameters you want to the combinator knobs or buttons, and then using the external MIDI control, again, which is a Max for Live device that generates CC numbers, and the external instrument destination, you can send all that MIDI through ReWire to Reason. And then if you spend a little time to think through subgrouping in Reason, I really only have 2 or 3 different types of sounds. So it makes efficiency sense to group them so I don't have a ton of audio channels coming back into Ableton. So again, I've got that framework set up, and then I only have 3 audio inputs here for each of those, and I am good to go. So that's it really quickly. These clips can be organized and arranged however you want, and they can integrate really well if you're playing tracks and you've got them sliced up into clips with different starting points. You can have all of your sound changes synchronized to happen exactly when you need them on downbeats, whatever. Or you can just MIDI map controls. If you wanted, you could map a knob to the chain selector if you want to change it that way, or really whatever works best for you. So I hope that's helpful, and I will jump off here and let you get back to music work. Have a great night.